My name is Diane Okafor. I am 41 years old, and when I pulled into my own driveway last Saturday night, I sat in the car for 11 minutes with the engine running because my hands wouldn't stop shaking long enough to unbuckle my seatbelt. The barbecue sauce was still on my forearm. A smear of it, rust-colored and sticky, from where Vanessa's palm had connected with my face hard enough to knock the plate I was holding sideways. The paper plate had landed sauce down on the patio stone, and my 7-year-old daughter had watched the whole thing from 6 feet away while holding a cup of lemonade she never finished. Let me tell you how we got there. Before I take you back to where this started, tell me, what time is it where you are right now? Because I remember exactly what time Vanessa's hand hit my face. It was 4:47 on a Sunday afternoon, and the coals were still smoking, and my son had just asked me if he could have seconds. Some moments don't just stay with you, they set up permanent residence. The barbecue was 3 weeks ago now. But the story goes back much further than that, back to a woman who married my older brother Gerald 9 years ago and spent every one of those years redrawing the boundaries of our family until I was standing outside every single one of them. My name is Diane Okafor. I'm a forensic document examiner. I've spent 16 years in a private laboratory analyzing questioned documents for insurance companies, law firms, estate attorneys, and occasionally federal investigators. My hands know the difference between a signature written freely and one traced from a photocopy by the pressure alone, the way the ink pools at hesitation points where a forger pauses to check their reference. I can identify the author of a handwritten note by the entry strokes on the letter T and the exit strokes on the letter S. I once caught a $2.3 million insurance fraud because the claimant used a ballpoint pen manufactured 7 months after the document was supposedly signed. That skill had exposed strangers' lies across conference tables for over a decade. It was about to do the same thing to my own family across a plastic folding table still covered in aluminum foil and hamburger grease. But I need to go further back, because Vanessa didn't just slap me at a barbecue. That was the last page of a chapter she'd been writing for years. Gerald is 4 years older than me. Growing up in Columbus, Ohio, we were close in the way siblings are close when their parents work long hours and someone has to make sure the younger one eats dinner. Gerald heated up canned soup for me on school nights when our mother pulled doubles at the hospital. He walked me to the bus stop until I was 12, and when I told him at 19 that I wanted to study forensic science instead of nursing like our mother, he was the first person who said, "Then do it, you'll be the best one they've ever seen." That was the Gerald I grew up with. That was the Gerald who existed before Vanessa. She came into the family in 2016, beautiful, loud in a way that filled rooms before you decided whether you wanted them filled. She had opinions about everything, the kind of confidence that gets mistaken for competence because it never pauses long enough for anyone to check. Within 2 years of marrying Gerald, she'd reorganized every family gathering around herself. Thanksgiving moved to their house. Christmas moved to their house. My mother's birthday dinner, which we'd held at the same Italian restaurant on Brighton Road for 15 years, suddenly relocated to Vanessa's dining room because she said she wanted to do something special. The first time she made me feel like I didn't belong was small enough that I almost missed it. Gerald's daughter from his first marriage, Amara, was turning 8. I'd bought her a telescope, a real one, because Amara had told me 3 separate times that she wanted to see Saturn's rings. When Amara opened it at the party, her face lit up like a sunrise, and Vanessa, standing behind her, said to no one in particular, "That's a lot of money to spend on someone else's child." She said it the way you'd comment on the weather, casual, practical, already moving on to the next thing. I stood there holding my cup of fruit punch, and my thumb pressed into the side of the plastic so hard it cracked. I didn't move, I didn't respond, but something in me was already cataloging. That was her first entry in a file I didn't know I was building. I should explain something about my own children because they are the center of everything that happened. I adopted my daughter Zora when she was 3, from the foster care system. 2 years later, I adopted my son Marcus when he was 4. I am their mother, not their foster mother, not their guardian, not their temporary arrangement, their mother. I went through 18 months of home studies, background checks, parenting courses, and a final hearing where a judge looked me in the eye and said, "These children are yours. I have the paperwork. I have the permanency orders. I have the adoption decrees signed and sealed by the Franklin County Probate Court with raised embossed seals I could identify in my sleep because I examine documents for a living. Vanessa never accepted it. Not once, not for a single day. She never said it outright in front of Gerald, not in the early years, but she had 100 small ways of drawing the line. At family dinners, she'd set the table and say, "How many are we? 6 adults and the kids." Not Gerald's niece and nephew, not Zora and Marcus. The kids, like they were borrowed, like they were visiting. The snorts beat me now because the irony is almost surgical. I spent my entire professional life examining documents to determine authenticity, verifying that signatures were genuine, that dates were real, that the person who claimed to have written something actually wrote it. And for 9 years, I failed to examine the most important document in my own life, the unwritten agreement my family had apparently made that Vanessa's version of who counted as real family would go unchallenged as long as the holidays ran smoothly. My mother Pauline saw all of it. She's 73 now, a retired surgical nurse with hands steady enough to thread a catheter in the dark. She noticed every slight. I know she did because I'd catch her watching Vanessa with that particular expression nurses get when they're assessing a patient who isn't telling them where it actually hurts. But Pauline Okafor raised her children to keep the peace. She survived 38 years of marriage to a man who left when Gerald was 12, and she survived it by choosing her battles with a precision that looked, from the outside, a lot like silence. She never told Vanessa to stop, she never corrected her. And every time I brought it up, gently, carefully, the way you approach a subject you already know will go nowhere, my mother would say, "She's Gerald's wife, Diane. We have to make it work." Make it work. 3 words that functioned as a cage for almost a decade. Now let me tell you about the barbecue. July 13th, Gerald and Vanessa's backyard, a half-acre lot in Westerville with a stamped concrete patio and a built-in stone grill Gerald had installed the previous summer. Vanessa had organized the whole thing, sent out a group text 3 weeks in advance with a menu, a time and a line at the bottom that read, "Family only please." 31 people came. My mother, Gerald's in-laws, cousins I hadn't seen in 2 years. My children were excited. Marcus had been talking about the pool all week. Zora had made a card for Gerald that said "Happy Summer Uncle G" in purple marker with a drawing of a hot dog that looked like a dachshund. We arrived at 3:15. Vanessa was at the grill wearing an apron that said "The Boss" in gold letters. She looked at me, looked at the kids, and said, with a smile bright enough to cut glass, "Oh, you brought them. I wasn't sure you would." As though my children attending a family barbecue was a logistical choice and not a certainty. I felt my jaw tighten. I set the potato salad I'd made on the table and said, "Of course I brought them." She was already turned away. By 4 o'clock, the food was out. Paper plates, plastic forks, a folding table covered in foil trays. I was making plates for Zora and Marcus, 2 burgers, corn on the cob, a scoop of coleslaw, the ordinary architecture of a summer afternoon, when Vanessa appeared beside me with that same calm, managerial expression she wore like a second face. "We didn't really plan portions for extra people," she said. My hand stopped moving. I was holding the serving spoon mid-air above the baked beans. Extra people. She was talking about my children, my legally adopted, court-decreed 7-year-old daughter and 9-year-old son. Extra people. I set the spoon down slowly. The metal touched the edge of the foil tray with a small sound that seemed louder than it was. My body went perfectly still. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. I wasn't angry yet. Something colder than anger was running calculations I hadn't authorized, cross-referencing every dinner, every holiday, every table she'd ever set where my children were an afterthought. "They're children, Vanessa," I said. "There's plenty of food." She leaned in closer, and her voice dropped to that particular register people use when they want to wound you without leaving a mark anyone else can see. "I just think it's interesting," she said, "that you always show up acting like a real mom when everyone's watching." I heard Marcus behind me ask Zora if she wanted ketchup. I heard the pool filter humming. I heard Gerald laughing at something his father-in-law said near the cooler. And I heard the sentence that had just come out of Vanessa's mouth land in my chest like a stone dropped into still water. I turned to face her fully, and I said, very quietly, "Say that again." She did, louder this time, loud enough that my mother looked up from across the patio, loud enough that Zora, who was standing 6 feet away holding her lemonade, heard every word. I said you're not a real mom, Diane. Everyone knows it. Playing house with someone else's kids doesn't make you a mother. Zora's face. I will carry my daughter's face in that moment for the rest of my life. The confusion. The way her mouth opened slightly, the way she looked at me as if checking whether what she'd just heard was true, as if a 7-year-old was being asked to verify the authenticity of her own family. I took one step toward Vanessa. I don't know what I was going to say. I didn't get the chance. She slapped me, open palm, full contact, hard enough to turn my head sideways. The plate I was holding flipped and hit the patio stone, and barbecue sauce splattered across my forearm in a long rust-colored streak. 31 people saw it. Nobody moved for what felt like a full minute. My mother stood up so fast her lawn chair tipped backward. Gerald came around the grill with an expression I'd never seen on his brother's face before, something between horror and the specific paralysis of a man who knows he should have intervened years ago and is now watching the cost of every time he didn't. I didn't slap her back. I didn't shout. I picked up the plate from the ground. I wiped the sauce from my arm with a napkin. I took Zora's hand in my left hand and Marcus's hand in my right, and I walked to my car without saying a single word to anyone. That was the barbecue. That was the event the family would spend the next 3 weeks arguing about. That was the moment Vanessa assumed she had won. She did not know that I had already started finding things. I've shown you what happened that afternoon. Now let me show you what I'd discovered in the weeks before it, and what I found in the weeks after. But first, where are you watching from? I want to know who's in this room with us tonight. 6 weeks before the barbecue, I'd been at my mother's house, helping her organize her filing cabinet, the old beige metal one she'd kept in the basement since 1994. My mother is meticulous about medical records but chaotic about everything else, and she'd asked me to help sort 30 years of paperwork she'd been meaning to shred. I was separating bank statements from tax returns when I found a life insurance policy update, the kind your provider sends annually with current beneficiary designations. My mother's policy, $320,000. And the primary beneficiary listed was not Gerald and Diane Okafor in equal shares, which is what my mother had told me the arrangement was for the last 15 years. The primary beneficiary was Gerald Okafor solely, with a secondary beneficiary listed as Vanessa Okafor. My name had been removed. My children were nowhere on the document. I held that paper for a long time. I turned it over. I checked the date. Revised 14 months earlier. I checked the signature line. My mother's name, or something very close to it. Cold math. I was already running it. The signature's baseline slant was 4 degrees steeper than my mother's natural hand. I'd analyzed hundreds of her documents over the years, birthday cards, checks, hospital consent forms. My mother writes with a consistent leftward slant of approximately 7 degrees. This signature sat at 11. The letter P in Pauline had no entry stroke. My mother always begins her capital P with a small upward hook, a habit so ingrained it appears even in her grocery lists. This P started flat. Someone had signed my mother's name, and they'd done it well enough to pass a casual glance, but not well enough to pass mine. I photographed the document. I photographed the signature under the magnifying lamp I carry in my work bag. I said nothing. I placed the policy update back in the filing cabinet exactly where I'd found it. Then I found something else. Over the next 2 weeks, I requested duplicate statements directly from my mother's insurance provider. I called the company, verified my authorization as listed emergency contact, and asked for the full revision history of the policy. The representative confirmed 3 changes in 18 months. The first, 13 months prior, added Gerald as sole primary. The second, 11 months prior, added Vanessa as secondary and removed my children from the contingent beneficiary list entirely. The third, 9 months prior, increased the policy's value from $220,000 to $320,000, with the additional premium payments drawn from an account I didn't recognize. The account belonged to Vanessa. She had been paying the increased premiums on my mother's life insurance policy, a policy that now paid out exclusively to her and Gerald, from her own checking account. She hadn't just changed the names, she'd invested in the outcome. I pulled the original policy from my mother's safe deposit box, the one my mother had shown me 6 years earlier when she gave me a key. I compared signatures across all 4 versions. The original bore my mother's authentic hand. Versions 2 through 4 did not. 3 forged signatures on 3 separate legal documents, each one almost correct. Each one betrayed by the same absent entry stroke on the capital P, and the same steepened baseline slant. Then I found the older pattern. I requested my mother's bank records going back 5 years. I cross-referenced every withdrawal over $500 with dates Vanessa had organized family events, vacations, and home improvements. In 47 months, Vanessa had initiated 14 transfers from a joint account she shared with Gerald, an account my mother had been added to as a co-signer 3 years prior at Vanessa's suggestion, for estate planning convenience. The total across those 14 transfers was $61,400. Every transfer coincided within 48 hours of a large purchase on Vanessa's personal credit card: furniture, a kitchen renovation deposit, a down payment on a boat Gerald never mentioned owning. My mother's savings had been systematically drained, and because Pauline Okafor trusted her son's wife to handle the bookkeeping she'd never enjoyed doing, she hadn't looked at the statements closely enough to see it. The document I found last made everything before it irrelevant. Not because it was worse, because it was first. Buried in the same filing cabinet, in a folder labeled Gerald Personal, I found a draft of a power of attorney document. It was unsigned, it was dated 2 years prior, and in the author field of the document's digital properties, because Vanessa had printed it from a Word file and my mother's ancient printer logs metadata on every page, the author was listed as V. Okafor Kansite Home PC. Vanessa had drafted a power of attorney document granting herself legal authority over my mother's finances. She hadn't filed it yet, but the template was ready, the structure was built. She was waiting for my mother to decline just enough that no one would question it. Vanessa hadn't just insulted my children, she hadn't just slapped me at a barbecue. She had been engineering financial control over my 73-year-old mother for years, and the fake mom performance was designed to isolate me from the family so thoroughly that by the time anyone looked closely at the money, I wouldn't be in the room to ask questions. The confrontation happened at Vanessa's house. Of course it did. The same stamped concrete patio, the same built-in grill, the same backyard she'd turned into her personal stage. Gerald had called a family meeting 3 weeks after the barbecue because my mother had demanded it. Vanessa agreed immediately because Vanessa believed the meeting was about the slap. She arrived at her own kitchen island with an apology rehearsed and a bottle of wine already open. She controlled this space. Every tile, every fixture, every framed photograph on the wall had been chosen by her. She believed she owned the room. 8 people were present: Gerald, Vanessa, my mother, my uncle, Raymond Okafor, my father's younger brother, Gerald's father-in-law, Louis, Vanessa's sister, Trish, and me. My children were at a neighbor's house. I had made certain of that. Vanessa spoke first. She apologized for the slap. She called it a moment of frustration that got out of hand. She said she loved this family and wanted to move forward. She even turned to me and said, "Diane, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have put my hands on you. That's not who I am." I let the silence hold for 3 seconds. Then I placed a manila folder on the kitchen island. "This isn't about the slap," I said. I opened the folder and placed the first document flat on the granite countertop, the life insurance beneficiary revision. I stated what it was. I stated that the signature was not my mother's. Vanessa's face did something complicated. "That's not what happened," she said. "Your mother asked us to update that." I placed the second document beside it, the premium payment records from Vanessa's personal account. I said nothing. "You're only doing this because you've always been jealous of what Gerald and I have built," she said. Her voice was climbing. "You've been looking for a reason to tear this family apart since the day I married your brother." I placed the third document, the 14 bank transfers, $61,400. I pointed to each date. I pointed to the corresponding credit card purchases. "After everything I've done for this family," Vanessa said, and now her voice had the particular vibration of someone feeling the floor shift beneath them. "I've hosted every holiday, I've taken care of Pauline, I've made this family function." Gerald was staring at the documents. His hands were flat on the countertop. He hadn't spoken. Not in front of everyone, Vanessa said, quieter now, glancing at her sister, at Louis. Diane, can we discuss this privately? This isn't appropriate. I placed the fourth document, the unsigned power of attorney. The printout with the metadata line highlighted in yellow, showing the author field, V. Okafor Home PC. That was when Raymond spoke. My uncle Raymond, 71 years old, a retired estate attorney who had spent 40 years drafting the exact type of document now sitting on his nephew's wife's kitchen island. He'd been silent the entire meeting, arms crossed, watching. Now he leaned forward and picked up the power of attorney draft. He examined it for less than 30 seconds. This is a durable power of attorney template, he said, his voice carrying the flat, unhurried authority of a man who has testified in probate court more times than he can count. It grants plenary financial authority. If this had been executed, Vanessa would have had legal control over every asset Pauline owns. He set it down. Who asked you to draft this? Vanessa's mouth opened. Nothing came out. My mother was looking at the bank transfer records. Her hand was pressed flat against her own chest. She turned to Vanessa and said, I gave you access because you said it would make taxes easier. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Gerald finally spoke. Vanessa, he said, just her name, one word. But the way he said it, I knew he'd already seen the answer in her silence. I looked at Vanessa across the kitchen island she had chosen, in the house she had decorated, surrounded by the family she had rearranged to suit herself, and I said the only thing I had come to say. You didn't resent my children because they were adopted. You resented them because they were mine, and as long as I had a reason to stay close to this family, I'd eventually look at the paperwork. I did not say another word for the rest of the evening. The weeks that followed moved with the particular weight of consequences arriving on their own schedule, unhurried and thorough. Gerald retained a forensic accountant independently. The audit confirmed every transfer I'd identified and found 3 more I'd missed, bringing the total to $74,000. My mother filed a police report. The detective assigned to the case was a woman named Sergeant Ada Ora Hayes, and she told my mother during the intake interview that financial exploitation of elders was the fastest-growing crime category in the county. The district attorney's office opened a formal investigation. Vanessa retained a defense attorney and stopped attending family events. Gerald filed for legal separation 5 weeks after the meeting. He moved into an apartment on Henderson Road, a 2-bedroom unit with white walls and almost no furniture. I visited him there on a Thursday evening and found him sitting on a folding chair eating takeout from a container balanced on a cardboard box. He looked at me with an expression I recognized, the specific bewilderment of someone whose entire domestic architecture has been revealed as a facade. I should have seen it, he said. I told him that Vanessa had built the structure specifically so that he wouldn't. Vanessa's social media accounts went quiet within days of the investigation becoming known among the family. The curated posts, the holiday tablescapes, the family portraits she'd orchestrated every December, all deleted. Her sister Trish stopped returning calls from anyone with the last name Okafor. Louis, Vanessa's father, sent my mother a handwritten letter that said, in its entirety, Pauline, I am sorry, I did not know. My mother kept it in the same filing cabinet where I'd found the insurance policy. She said she believed him. She also said she wasn't sure that mattered. The joint account was frozen by court order. A restitution hearing was scheduled. Vanessa's access to my mother's financial records was terminated, and my mother designated Raymond as her power of attorney, properly executed, witnessed and notarized in his own office with the door open. Trish is the one I need to tell you about though. Vanessa's younger sister, 34, a dental hygienist who'd been part of every family gathering for 9 years. She had repeated Vanessa's not a real mom language more than once, casually, in the way people echo the loudest voice in the room without examining what they're actually saying. After the barbecue, Trish had texted me an emoji, a single grimacing face, which I suppose was her version of acknowledging that watching her sister slap someone at a cookout was uncomfortable. But Trish had been at the kitchen island meeting. She'd seen the documents. She'd watched her sister's face when Raymond identified the power of attorney. 3 days later, Trish sent me a text that was longer than anything she'd ever written me. Diane, I saw things over the years that I should have questioned. Vanessa told me your mother wanted the account changes. I believed her because she's my sister. I repeated things about you and your kids that I should not have repeated. I am sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just need you to know I see it now. I read the message twice. I did not respond for 4 days. When I did, I wrote, "Thank you for saying that, Trish. I'm not ready to talk about it yet, but I appreciate you telling me." It was honest. It was also incomplete. Because seeing it now, after 9 years, after $61,000, after my daughter heard herself called not real at a barbecue, was not the same thing as having seen it then, and I wasn't prepared to pretend it was. My mother came to my house on a Sunday morning, 6 weeks after everything. She sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea she didn't drink and said, "I should have stopped her years ago. I chose peace and it cost you." I told her I understood why she'd done it. I also told her that understanding didn't erase the years. She nodded. She didn't cry. Pauline Okafor has been a surgical nurse for too long to confuse tears with treatment, she said. "What do you need from me now?" And I told her the truth. "I need you to know my kids the way they deserve to be known, not as extras, not as additions, as your grandchildren." She put her hand over mine and held it. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. For 6 years I had been saving for a down payment on a home with a yard for Zora and Marcus. Every time I got close, something pulled the number back. Gerald needed help with property taxes. My mother's medical bills needed supplementing, bills I now understood had been inflated by Vanessa's access to accounts. The yard, the swing set, the garden Zora kept drawing in crayon on construction paper, stayed perpetually on the horizon, always another year away. I closed on the house in September. A 3-bedroom Cape Cod on a 1/4-acre lot in Clintonville, with a backyard big enough for the swing set Marcus had circled in a hardware store catalog, and a garden bed Zora measured with a ruler the day we moved in. I stood in that backyard on the first evening, after the boxes were in and the kids were asleep, and I held a cup of coffee with both hands. The air smelled like cut grass and cooling asphalt. The barbecue sauce stain was gone from my arm. It had been gone for weeks. But I could still feel exactly where it had landed, the same forearm, the same rust-colored streak, and now that arm was resting on the railing of my own porch, in my own yard, where every plate at every table had my children's names on it, because I set the table, and I decided who belonged. I've been thinking about what loyalty actually requires, and I've come to believe it requires sight, not blind devotion, not the kind of silence my mother offered for years because she confused keeping the peace with keeping the family. Real loyalty requires you to look directly at the thing happening in front of you and call it by its name, even when the person doing it is someone you love, even when naming it will cost you the version of the family that felt comfortable. My mother's silence wasn't cruelty. It was exhaustion dressed as diplomacy, but silence in the presence of harm is still a room where harm can breathe. I know that now. She knows that now. And knowing it together, imperfectly, without pretending the years didn't happen, is the closest thing to repair I've found so far. Boundaries are not punishments. They are the conditions under which trust becomes possible again. I didn't set boundaries with Vanessa to hurt her. I set them because my children were listening, and what they heard at that barbecue was a woman telling them their family wasn't real, and 31 people standing in silence as though that statement was open for debate. I set boundaries so that Zora and Marcus would grow up knowing that the documents are signed, the court has spoken, and their mother will stand in front of anything that tries to tell them otherwise. If you were at that barbecue, or one like it, the gathering where someone said something cruel about a person you loved and you looked at your plate instead of opening your mouth, I'm not here to condemn you for it. I understand the math you were doing. I did it myself for years. But I want to ask you this. When you chose silence that day, who were you protecting? Because it wasn't the person holding the lemonade. This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, education, and dramatic reflection. We hope it reminded you that your dignity is not negotiable, and that setting a boundary, even a painful one, can be an act of love for yourself and everyone the pattern would have reached next.